My life was a well-organized spreadsheet. I lived in a modern high-rise in the city, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that reminded me every day of the opportunities one had earned. My work as a compliance officer for a massive financial institution wasn't just a job, it was my purpose. I was a guardian of integrity, ensuring every transaction, every policy, and every dollar followed the letter of the law. I worked alone, but not in a lonely way. I was a solo operator, the final stop on the line. But that sense of stability was about to be shattered by the very person I looked up to most. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My career was on an upward trajectory. After a decade of climbing the ladder, I'd finally landed my dream job as a senior compliance officer at Sterling Global Investments, a company that, from the outside, appeared to be the gold standard of financial integrity. My direct supervisor was Robert Sterling, the head of operations. At 58, Robert was a living legend within the company. He had the kind of graying hair and authoritative presence that made you trust him implicitly. He was a mentor to me, and our working relationship was built on a mutual respect for the rules. He was old school, I was the next generation. We balanced each other out, or so I thought. Our department was considered the company's moral compass. We audited transactions, flagged potential risks, and ensured we were always one step ahead of regulatory scrutiny. I was proud to be part of that. My routine was meticulous. Arrive early, review reports, attend meetings, and audit systems. It was a comfortable, predictable life, and I had no reason to believe anything was amiss. Robert and I had a close professional bond. He'd often stay late with me, sharing stories from his early days in finance, talking about the importance of ethics, and sometimes he'd ask me to handle small, seemingly insignificant tasks for him. "Morgan, can you review this vendor contract? Just a quick look for compliance loopholes," he'd say. Or, "I'm swamped. Can you just greenlight this expense report for me? It's for a high-value client." These requests were always framed as him trusting me, relying on my expertise. He never made me feel like I was doing his job, he made me feel like I was a key part of his. One of his most frequent requests was for me to handle his special projects. These were always marked as confidential in the system, and Robert would hand me a physical flash drive with files on it, asking me to run them through my audit programs, looking for anything that might raise a red flag. He explained that these were pre-audits for his team to make sure everything was clean before it went through the official channels. It made perfect sense. I was his safeguard. I took great pride in being his final line of defense. My work-life balance was good, too. My weekends were mine, spent with friends or just enjoying my quiet apartment. One of my closest friends in the office was Jessica Rhodes, a senior internal auditor in a different department. We often grabbed coffee and would complain about the mundane parts of our jobs. Jessica was sharp and had a great sense of humor. She was the only person I trusted enough to talk to about the subtle pressure I felt sometimes. She would laugh and say, "That's just Robert being Robert. He knows you're the best. He trusts you more than he trusts himself." This sense of trust was a powerful thing. It was a shield that kept me from ever questioning him. I had a foundation built on respect, loyalty, and a shared professional purpose. I was a compliance officer, and he was the head of operations. We were partners in upholding the company's values. I believed that. I lived that. And for a long, blissful, and terrifyingly naive period, I was completely certain that my foundation was unshakable. It was about to become clear that it was built on sand. The first crack appeared on a Thursday afternoon. Robert walked into my office, a stressed look on his face. This was unusual for him, he was always cool under pressure. He had a manila envelope in his hand. "Morgan, I need a massive favor," he said, his voice low. "It's a huge deal for a client. We're finalizing the contract, but the legal team needs one last-minute audit. it has to be done now. The client is flying in tomorrow morning to sign. He explained that the files were too sensitive to be put on the company network. They were on a flash drive he pulled from the envelope. I need you to take this home with you and run the audit overnight. Just make sure it's clean, he said, emphasizing the last word. It's a massive win for us if we close this deal. And I can't afford any leaks. He made it sound so urgent, so important. And he trusted me, right? He was literally asking me to bypass official procedures because he thought I was the only person he could rely on. He saw my hesitation and added, "Morgan, you're the best. I'll make sure you're compensated for the extra time. This is a one-time thing." I took the flash drive, feeling a mix of pride and unease. The too sensitive to be on the network part was a bit strange, but I dismissed it as corporate paranoia. That night, I went home, logged on to my personal laptop, and inserted the flash drive. The file names were gibberish, just a long string of letters and numbers. This was also odd, but I thought it might be a security protocol. I ran my standard suite of compliance checks on them. Everything came back clean. Nothing. No red flags, no suspicious transactions, no questionable clauses. The data seemed to be simple, legitimate financial records. I felt a sense of relief. I had done what Robert asked. The next day, I handed him the flash drive and my report. He looked at it, smiled, and said, "I knew I could count on you." A few weeks later, the deal was announced. It was a massive success, and our department was praised for its efficiency. My small part in it went unnoticed by most, but Robert made sure I knew he appreciated it. He gave me a generous bonus, and for a while, everything went back to normal. Then, I was having coffee with Jessica. She was looking through her own audit files for an unrelated project. "Hey, do you remember that massive deal we closed a few weeks ago? The one with the French conglomerate?" she asked. "Yeah, I remember," I said. I was looking through some of the financial reports, and I just noticed something really odd. A series of small transfers, like a dozen of them, went out to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It was disguised as payments for consulting services. They were a few $1,000s each, well below the limit that would trigger an automatic red flag for our systems. But all of them added up to a serious amount. It's almost as if someone knew exactly how to work around our automated flags. My blood ran cold. I immediately thought of the files Robert had given me on the flash drive. I had audited them. They were clean. I felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe the transfers were a legitimate expense? No. The way Jessica described them, they were a textbook example of money laundering. And the consulting services part was a classic cover. I asked Jessica for the file numbers. I wanted to see them for myself. The files she was talking about were part of the deal I had audited for Robert. I remembered the clean reports I had run. A cold, hard fact hit me. The data on the flash drive I audited for Robert was not the same data that was on the company's internal network. He had given me a dummy set of files. I had been a part of a fake audit. And the worst part? My personal computer was where I had done the audit. The trust one had for Robert, the perfect job, the unshakable foundation, it all felt like it was crumbling. I had been used. My name, my professional integrity, was just a tool in his scheme. It wasn't about trust. It was about manipulation. And for the first time, I saw the golden facade of my mentor crack, revealing a dark and dangerous secret. I couldn't shake the feeling of being a pawn. The realization that Robert had used me to launder money, or at least to cover his tracks, was a bitter pill to swallow. The files Jessica showed me were real. The ones I had audited were not. He had used my home computer as a way to circumvent company security protocols. My own machine was a part of the crime, and I was the unwitting accomplice. I knew I had to be careful. If I went straight to HR or the legal department, I would be seen as a rogue employee, possibly even a conspirator. My story would be the compliance officer who was fooled and now is making accusations to cover her own tracks. He had been so careful. He had a plausible excuse for everything. The flash drives, the sensitive data, the private audit. It was a brilliant, sinister plan, and I had walked right into it. The anger was a slow burn, but it was there. I couldn't ignore it. I had to know for certain. My first step was to find a link between the transfers and Robert. This was a painstaking process, and I couldn't just access his personal files. I needed another way. My focus shifted back to the fake files. The gibberish file names. I remembered them. G0982A19682F7B002E90212888. It was a long, random string. But maybe it wasn't random. A thought occurred to me. Maybe it was a coded message, a key to something. I had to assume everything Robert did was a calculated risk. Why would he give me a flash drive with file names like that? I started to go through my old audit files. I had kept a log of all the special projects Robert had given me. There were a dozen of them over the last few years. Every single flash drive had files with similarly long, random-looking file names. I copied them all into a spreadsheet, meticulously noting the dates. I spent my lunch breaks and late nights in a quiet corner of the library, poring over books on cryptography and data encoding. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I looked for patterns, for repeating numbers, for any kind of sequence. Nothing. I felt like I was hitting a wall. Then, a thought occurred to me. What if the code was not in the file names themselves, but in their order? I started to look at the date and timestamps of when the files were created on the flash drives. They were not in chronological order. I started to resort them based on their creation date and time. And I took the first letter of each of the gibberish file names. The result was a string of letters that seemed to make no sense at all. But then I looked at the file size. The smallest file size was 1 kilobyte. The largest was 10 kilobytes. There were a number of file sizes in between. I started to create a map, associating a letter with a file size. For example, a 1 kilobyte file could be A, a 2 kilobytes file could be B, and so on. I put this crazy theory to the test. I went through the entire history of special projects and started to piece together the files, using the timestamp to create a sequence and the file size to decode a word. The result was a chillingly clear message, a roadmap of Robert's financial crimes. Each flash drive was a single sentence. One of the early drives, the first one he gave me, spelled out "test the system." Another, "see if she bites." Another, "all funds are safe." The flash drive with the French conglomerate files? The coded message read, "Operation Ghost Files initiated." I now had the proof I needed. Robert was not just a criminal, he was a calculated, meticulous criminal who was so confident in his scheme that he had left a coded trail in plain sight. He was using the very systems I was meant to protect to build his own secret network. The realization was sickening. I had been his shield, his test subject, and now, I was his greatest threat. I had a coded roadmap of Robert's crimes, but that was all it was. It was not enough to go to the authorities. It was circumstantial, and I could easily be dismissed as a disgruntled employee with a conspiracy theory. I needed more. I needed a co-conspirator of my own, an ally who could help me navigate the digital labyrinth of the company. My first thought was Jessica. She was the one who had spotted the strange transfers, and she was an internal auditor. She had access to files and systems that I didn't. I asked her to meet me for coffee outside of work. The moment she sat down, I put my hand on her arm and said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust me completely. What I'm about to tell you is serious, and it could put both of our careers at risk." I told her everything. About the flash drives, the fake audits, the gibberish file names, and my discovery of the coded message. I showed her my spreadsheet. I could see the initial disbelief on her face slowly turn to a horrified understanding. She was an auditor, she knew what she was looking at. The transfers she had flagged were part of a larger, systemic scheme. She was shocked, but not as shocked as I thought she would be. I knew something was off, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Those transfers, they were too clean. They were designed to not be flagged. It was a professional job. But I never would have guessed it was Robert. Jessica agreed to help. She had access to the financial logs, and she could help me cross-reference the coded messages with actual transactions. We would meet secretly, often late at night or on weekends. We used burner phones to communicate. We knew that our corporate emails and messaging systems were likely monitored, so we took no chances. We quickly realized that the scope of Robert's operation was far larger than we had imagined. The coded messages pointed to shell companies, dummy corporations, and offshore accounts. The money was being funneled through a series of transactions that were carefully structured to be below the radar of any single auditor. It was a well-oiled machine, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. But the coded messages only gave us part of the story. They told us what he was doing, but not how he was doing it. He had to be manipulating the systems. He had to have access to the databases and the audit logs to cover his tracks. That's where Liam Patel came in. Liam was the head of IT security. He was a quiet man, an expert in his field, and he was fiercely protective of the company's network. He had a reputation for being a bit of a stickler for the rules. I knew he was the only person who could help us. But I also knew he was a close friend of Robert's. Getting him to help would be the hardest part. Jessica and I agreed on a strategy. I would approach him with a hypothetical. We met in a public park, far from the office. Liam, I said, I have a question for you, and it's purely hypothetical. If someone wanted to secretly manipulate financial data, a senior executive, for example, what would be the best way to do it without leaving a trace? He looked at me, his face unreadable. That's a very specific hypothetical, Morgan. I know, I said. I'm working on a presentation about our system's vulnerabilities. It's a bit of a passion project. I just wanted your expert opinion. I could see him thinking. He started to explain the vulnerabilities, how someone could exploit backdoors in the system, how they could manipulate audit logs, and how they could use their authority to bypass security protocols. He didn't mention Robert by name, but he was giving me a masterclass in how someone could commit the very crimes I was investigating. After he finished, I looked him in the eye. Liam, this isn't a hypothetical. I think someone is doing this. I think it's Robert. He went white. He denied it at first, of course. Robert is my friend, Morgan. He's the most ethical man I know. But I had a secret weapon. I showed him the coded messages. The dates, the transactions, the shell companies. I could tell he was a man who respected data. He saw the patterns, the meticulousness, and he knew it was not a coincidence. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, Morgan, if this is true, it's not just a crime. It's a betrayal of everything we stand for. Liam became our secret third ally. He had the technical knowledge to find the digital fingerprints that Robert had left behind. Our small, clandestine team was complete. We were no longer two women with a crazy theory. We were an alliance, and we were about to build a case that would bring down a king. With Liam on our team, the investigation went into overdrive. He had the ability to go deeper into the network than Jessica or I could. He could access system logs, trace IP addresses, and monitor data flows without raising a single red flag. We were working against the clock. We knew Robert would be careful, but we also knew that no system is perfect, and every transaction leaves a trace. Liam discovered that Robert was using a backdoor he had created years ago, a digital key that allowed him to make changes to the audit logs without a record. It was a ghost in the machine, something that had been built into the system during a major update years ago and had been forgotten. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. He had built his own private highway to financial fraud, and he was confident that no one would ever find it. Jessica, using the information Liam was giving her, started to connect the dots. The coded messages were not just a series of words, they were a financial roadmap. Each message corresponded to a specific transaction, a specific shell company, and a specific dollar amount. The ghost files I had been given were a diversion. The real crime was happening in the system, and I had been a part of the show, a smokescreen. My role was to continue to be the good, loyal compliance officer. I had to act as if nothing was wrong. I had to attend meetings, smile, and nod when Robert spoke. It was the hardest part. He would often compliment my work, saying, "Morgan is one of the most trustworthy people in this company." And I would just smile and nod, my blood boiling. The plan was simple: gather enough concrete, undeniable evidence to present a full case to the company's board and the financial regulatory authorities. We couldn't go to HR. We couldn't go to legal. Robert was too well connected. He would discredit us, destroy our careers, and disappear. We had to go straight to the top, with a case so solid that it couldn't be dismissed. Our nights were spent in a whirlwind of spreadsheets, encrypted messaging, and quiet, nervous conversations. We worked from our homes, using secure networks and encrypted software. We built a timeline, a complete history of Robert's financial crimes, starting from the day he created the backdoor and ending with the most recent transaction. It was a masterpiece of detective work. Liam provided screenshots of the manipulated audit logs. Jessica provided the financial statements and the links to the shell companies. I provided the coded messages, the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy. We had everything: a motive, a method, and a paper trail, a digital one, but a trail nonetheless. We knew we had to be careful. The moment we presented the evidence, our lives would change. Robert would be furious, and he would come after us. He was a powerful man, with an extensive network. We needed to be ready. We had to prepare for the fallout. We all had go bags at home, with laptops, important documents, and our research. We had a plan in place to meet in a neutral, public place if things went wrong. It felt like something out of a spy movie, but it was real. The day we were ready, we scheduled a meeting. Not with Robert, not with our superiors, but with the chairman of the board himself, Thomas Finch. Getting a meeting with him was almost impossible, but Jessica had an old friend who worked as his assistant, and she used an excuse about a high-level, time-sensitive compliance matter that could affect the company's reputation. It was vague, but it worked. I knew this was it. The moment of truth. We were about to walk into a room and accuse a living legend of corporate fraud. Our careers, our reputations, our futures, it all hung in the balance. But there was a strange calm in the air. The long nights, the stress, the fear, it was all culminating in this one moment. We were ready. The quiet build-up was over. The conference room was on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the city I had once been so proud to work in. Thomas Finch, the chairman, was a tall, imposing man with a stern face. He sat at the head of the table, flanked by two other board members. We were a nervous trio, but we had a plan. We had rehearsed this a dozen times. I started the presentation. I didn't mince words. "Mr. Finch, thank you for your time. We have uncovered a systemic fraud operation within this company, orchestrated by a senior executive, Robert Sterling." The room went silent. The board members' faces were a mix of disbelief and annoyance. I could see them thinking, who are these people to make such wild accusations? I didn't give them a chance to speak. I launched into the presentation, my voice steady and professional. I started with the coded messages, showing the patterns, the timestamps, and my theory. I presented the spreadsheet, the same one that had given me the first glimpse into his deceit. It was a compelling narrative, but it was still just a theory. Then, Jessica took over. She presented the financial data, the series of small, suspicious transfers, and the links to the shell companies. She showed them how the consulting services were just a cover. She was a master with numbers, and she presented a clear, undeniable picture of financial manipulation. But the final blow was from Liam. He came to the table with a laptop. "What you're seeing is the manipulation of our internal audit logs," he said, his voice flat. He showed them a side-by-side comparison of a legitimate transaction and one of Robert's manipulated transactions. The differences were subtle but undeniable. He then showed them the digital footprint, the specific IP address that had made the changes, an address that led directly to a personal server that Robert had set up in his home office. "He created a backdoor in our system years ago," Liam explained. "He used his authority to get the IT team to implement it, disguised as a security protocol. It was a single line of code that gave him total, unmonitored access to the financial logs. He was cleaning up his own messes before they ever had a chance to be seen." The room was in shock. The board members leaned forward, their faces grim. The evidence was irrefutable. It was not a theory, it was a fact. The coded messages, the financial data, the manipulated logs, they all told the same story. Just as the silence was becoming deafening, the door to the conference room opened. Robert Sterling walked in, his face a mask of confidence. He had a look of controlled fury. "I heard you were having an unauthorized meeting," he said, his eyes fixed on me. "What is this all about?" Mr. Finch looked at him, his expression cold. "Robert, sit down. We were just getting to the final part of their presentation." I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I opened the final slide on my presentation. It was a single image of my hand holding the flash drive, the one he had given me for the fake audit. Underneath it, I had put a single line of text: "The evidence is in the logs, Robert. You gave me the key to your entire operation." His face drained of all color. He saw the flash drive, and he knew. He knew that I had not been fooled. He knew that his test subject, his pawn, had become his downfall. The brilliant mastermind had been so confident in his scheme that he had left a piece of it with me, the one person he thought he could trust the most. He had thought the fake audit was a brilliant way to cover his tracks. In reality, it was the first thread that unraveled his entire life's work. He tried to protest, to deny it all, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The board members listened to his frantic protestations with grim expressions. Within minutes, the decision was made. Robert was terminated on the spot. He was escorted out of the building, his face a picture of stunned disbelief. The empire he had built had crumbled in the time it took to give a presentation. The aftermath was a blur of legal meetings, corporate investigations, and media firestorms. The story of Robert Sterling's downfall was a sensation. Our story was a quiet one, a footnote in a bigger scandal. We were not seeking fame, we were seeking justice. Our roles changed almost overnight. Robert's position was dissolved, and a new department was created to oversee compliance and internal audits, with a strict separation of duties. I was promoted to head of compliance, with Jessica as my second in command. Liam was given a blank check to overhaul the company's entire IT security system. We were now the guardians of the very system we had just helped to expose as broken. The company was in chaos for a while. The stock price dropped, and there were layoffs, but we were able to rebuild it with the new systems. We were transparent with the regulators and with the public. It was a difficult period, but it was also a cleansing one. The company was no longer built on a lie. It was built on a new, unshakable foundation of integrity. I often thought about Robert. His career, his reputation, his legacy, it had all turned to ashes. He had been so clever, so meticulous, and so confident. He had tested me, and he had won. But he had been so sure of his win that he had overlooked one thing: the human element. He had underestimated my integrity. He had underestimated my friends. He had underestimated me. I never saw him again. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced. He lost everything. The money he had laundered was returned to the company and the clients he had defrauded. His life was a cautionary tale, a lesson in the dangers of greed and arrogance. My life was no longer a well-organized spreadsheet. It was a complex and rewarding journey. I worked with Jessica and Liam every day, and we had a different kind of alliance now. It was not one forged in secrecy and fear, but one built on trust and mutual respect. We were a team, a new kind of team. We were the people who had brought down a king, and we were determined to make sure no one else could ever do it again. The city view from my office was the same, but it felt different now. It was no longer just a reminder of the opportunities one had earned. It was a reminder of the choices I had made, the risks I had taken, and the justice I had served. I had gone from being a pawn in someone else's game to being the one who wrote the rules. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.